The letter from the Southern Lowland Collective arrived on a Tuesday, which was already an inauspicious start. I read trade correspondence on Mondays, dispatched replies on Wednesdays, and kept Tuesdays for the business of the kingdom that could not wait for a schedule. The border counts, the keeper reports, the iron ledgers that told me how Gravest was breathing. A Tuesday letter from the collective meant someone there had decided urgency was on their side, and that decision was almost always wrong. I read it anyway, standing at the window of the counting room with the slate rooftops of the lower city spread below me, and the northern pass hidden somewhere behind the gray morning cloud. The letter was politely worded and transparent in its aims. The collective wished to resume the northern trade route. They were prepared to send a delegation to Gravest to negotiate a formal pact, not merely a resumption of the old toll arrangement, but a document with proper seals and registered terms. 7 delegates, 2 weeks, all lodging and formalities to be provided by the Crown. I set the letter down on the window ledge and looked at the cloud that was hiding my northern pass. 11 years. 11 years since Vor had gone feral in the upper corridor and made the pass his own. 11 years since the last keeper, a solid man named Dressed, had come back from the north yard with 3 fingers gone and a look in his eyes that meant he would not be going back. 11 years of winter trade routes running south around the long ridge, adding 6 days to every caravan, adding cost that the lowland merchants absorbed and the highland traders could not. 11 years of my counsel suggesting, at intervals that had grown from quarterly to monthly, that the wolf ought to be destroyed. I had not destroyed the wolf. I had my reasons, and they were private. I wrote back to the collective on Wednesday, as was proper, and agreed to receive their delegation. 7 delegates, 2 weeks. The Northern Pass survey was already on the itinerary. It was always on the itinerary. And if the collective wanted to see firsthand why the trade route remained impassable, they were welcome to ride to the edge of Vor's territory and observe. The delegation arrived on a gray Thursday morning, through the iron south gate, on horses that were clearly lowland-bred and somewhat alarmed by the altitude. My steward Fenrath received them in the outer court, as was protocol when a delegation did not merit the king's personal greeting, which this one did not, and I watched from the gallery above the great hall as they were sorted into their rooms. 7 of them, a lead negotiator named Oswald, broad-shouldered and practiced in the carrying of his own importance. 2 trade assessors with identical ledger satchels, a legal specialist who moved as though he was already annotating something in his head, a cartographer, a record keeper. And in the last position of the line, a woman I noticed only because she was the only one who looked up at the gallery. Not at me specifically, at the architecture. She looked at the stone arches above the great hall the way a person looks at something they are genuinely curious about, not performing interest for company, just actually seeing the shape of a thing. Then she followed the line into the corridor and was gone. I noted her as the junior member, the seat filler. Every delegation sent one person who was there to be present, to make the headcount correct, to carry the second set of records. She was that person. I did not ask Fenrath her name. The first 3 days were negotiations in the technical sense, which meant Oswald and my senior trade advisor Oris sat across a table and moved numbers toward each other while I observed and occasionally spoke a number that ended a particular exchange. The collective wanted the pass route restored. I wanted the pass route restored. The question was what shape the formal agreement would take, and who would bear which costs when the route was blocked by weather, which it was, seasonally, for approximately 40 days per winter. The woman, the junior seat, attended every session. She sat at the far end of the table, kept the secondary record, spoke only when Oswald addressed a question to her, and answered those questions with a brevity that seemed, in the context of the delegation, almost remarkable. Oswald had not given her a role in the negotiations proper. She was there to witness and record. She did it without apparent resentment and without apparent boredom, which, over 3 days, I began to notice. On the second morning, she was not in the counting chamber when the session opened. She arrived 8 minutes after the start, which Oswald marked with a flicker of irritation. She sat down, opened her record book, and gave no explanation. Fenrath told me at the midday meal that she had been in the north yard. The wolf-keeper's yard, which was adjacent to the stable and visible from the north kitchen garden, where one of the kitchen staff had been hanging herbs and had seen her. I said nothing to Fenrath about it. I said nothing to anyone. On the third morning she was there at the session start, record book already open. She had been to the yard again. I knew because I had gone to the gallery window that faced north before the session and looked down. The yard gate had been left unlatched, which was standard practice. Vor never came into the yard itself, only to the heavy iron fence that separated the yard from the outer enclosure. The fence had been reinforced twice in 10 years and bore the marks of it. 3 seasons ago, when I had considered hiring a new keeper, every candidate I interviewed had gone pale at the description of the enclosure. She had stood at the fence for 20 minutes, according to the kitchen worker who had watched out of her own alarm, and then walked back to the keep without hurrying. I did not ask what had happened at the fence, if Vor had come close, and Vor did not come close to anyone, not anymore. I would have heard about it from the alarm system. The alarm was a bell at the north corner of the yard. It had not rung. The 4th day was a pass survey. It was on the itinerary, and Oswald had been anticipating it as a demonstration of good faith. The collective seeing firsthand the obstacle that was disrupting the trade route, the Crown showing transparency about the difficulty. My senior trade advisor Orist considered it a formality. My second-in-command, Torvald, considered it a waste of a morning that could be spent in the negotiating room. I considered it necessary, for reasons I kept to myself. We rode north at mid-morning. 11 riders, the 7 delegates, myself, Orist, Torvald, and a single guard for the front. The pass road climbed for 40 minutes through scrub pine and iron-gray rock before opening into the upper corridor, a broad shelf of land between 2 ridges, perhaps 200 yards wide, where the trade route had run for 4 generations before Vor had made it his own. The surface was packed snow over frozen ground in winter and bare stone in summer. This was the turn of autumn, so it was the first ice, the thin, deceptive kind that looks like wet stone until you step wrong. We stopped at the edge of the upper corridor, where my guard marked the boundary with a raised fist. There was no sign of Vor. There was never a sign at first. That was part of it. The upper corridor looked empty and still, and it felt like standing at the edge of something that had not yet decided what it would do. Oswald was asking Orist a question about the dimensions of the corridor. The legal specialist was making notes. The cartographer was sketching the ridgeline. The record keeper had her book out. The junior seat, I had still not learned her name and was beginning to find that odd, given that I had learned every other delegate's name within the first hour, was standing at the edge of our group, looking north into the corridor. Not tense, not braced, just looking. Vor came from the western shadow. He was large. He had always been large, even as a pup, even in the early years of the keep when he was a bonded wolf and not a feral one. He had outpaced the other wolves by a full hand's width at the shoulder. Now he was 11 years gone to the wild, fed on the upper passes deer and whatever else moved through the snow up there, and he was the kind of size that made the horses immediately want to be somewhere else. My horse shifted. Torvald's horse backed 2 steps and had to be held. The collective's horses made a sound collectively that was not quite panic, but was moving in that direction. Vor did not look at the horses. Vor did not look at me, or at Orist, or at Oswald, or at the legal specialist, or the cartographer, or the record keeper. Vor walked, with the deliberate and unhurried pace of something that has decided where it is going, directly across the upper corridor toward the junior seat. I heard Torvald's breath stop. I heard Orist say very quietly my name. The woman stood still, not frozen, not rigid with fear, Still the way a person is still when they are paying attention to something and do not want to interrupt it. Her hands were at her sides. She was watching the wolf come toward her with an expression that was, from where I sat on my horse 8 yards away, simply interested. Vor stopped 3 feet from her. He lowered his head. Not the slow downward press of aggression, the other way, the other motion, the one that meant something I had not seen from him in 11 years. He lowered his head and then folded himself, all that size, down to the ground at her feet. Not at her feet exactly, just toward her, arranged near her the way a dog arranges near a fire. He lay down in the snow of the upper corridor. The trade delegation was silent, not the careful silence of people maintaining composure, the actual silence of people who have lost it temporarily. Oswald's mouth had opened. The legal specialist's pen had stopped mid-stroke and he had not noticed. Even the cartographer, who had been focused on his ridgeline, was staring. Orist, after a moment, said, "The pass is clear." That was not precisely what had happened, but it was not precisely wrong either. I sat on my horse and watched the wolf lie at her feet, and felt something arrive in my chest that I did not have a name for and did not reach for one. It sat there, quiet and specific and inconvenient, while I thought about the 11 years of keeper candidates and alarm bells and a Tuesday letter and a woman who had stood at the iron fence for 20 minutes and then walked back without hurrying. She had not flinched. That was the thing. Not at 20 minutes, not now. She looked at Vor the way she had looked at the stone arches of the great hall, with genuine attention, not performance. The wolf seemed to understand the difference. I wondered with a dry and private clarity whether I did. We rode back. The negotiating session that afternoon was efficient in the way that sessions are efficient when people have seen something they cannot quite categorize and decide the best response is to focus very hard on the numbers in front of them. Oswald moved through the terms quickly. My trade advisor matched him. By the end of the afternoon, we had resolved the winter blockage cost share, which had been the last significant point of disagreement, and the formal document was drafted for review. I asked Fenrath that evening for the name of the junior delegate. He told me, Len, a record keeper from the collective's southern office, which managed correspondence and formal documentation for the lowland trade associations. She had been with the collective for 9 years. She had spent 3 of those years on circuit with the eastern mining associations before returning to the southern office. Oswald had brought her because she was the fastest and most accurate secondary recorder in the southern office, and because she was, in Oswald's words to his own second, easy to have in a room. Fenrath delivered that last piece without inflection, which was professional of him. She goes to the north yard, I said. Yes, Fenrath said, every morning before the session. How long each morning? 20 minutes, sometimes 30. What does she do there? Stands at the fence, Fenrath said. The second morning Vor came to the fence. I was quiet. He did not aggress, Fenrath said carefully. He came to the outer side of the enclosure fence and stood. She did not retreat. They were there together for approximately 10 minutes before she returned to the keep. I dismissed him and sat with that for a while. Vor had not come to the fence voluntarily for 7 years, not since the 3rd year of his feral period, when a keeper's apprentice had tried a long-distance approach, and the wolf had arrived at the fence only to press his weight against it until the fence moved and the apprentice ran. That visit had cost us a fence repair and the apprentice's employment. After that, the fence was reinforced and the volunteers stopped coming forward. Len had stood at the fence and Vor had come to it, and neither of them had treated it as an event. The document was reviewed and initialed the following morning. The formal signing was scheduled for the afternoon of the 6th day, which left the delegation with 2 days of what Oswald was calling good faith observation, riding the southern portions of the trade route, inspecting the road surfaces and the way station infrastructure. The junior seat attended one of these rides and was excused from the second, which fell during a morning session where her secondary record was required. I knew the morning she was excused from the ride, because I went to the gallery that faced the north yard at the hour she would have been riding out, and I watched. She went to the fence. Vor came to the fence, not immediately, not in the first 10 minutes, but he came, and this time she was speaking when he arrived. I could not hear what she said from the gallery window. I could see the shape of sound moving from her, low and even, and I could see Vor's ears move in the way wolf ears move when they are attending to a specific sound. She reached through the fence, not carelessly, with the deliberateness of someone who understands that they are doing something unusual and is choosing to do it anyway. Her hand, flat-palmed, extended into the enclosure side. Vor pressed his face against her palm. He had not allowed that from a human hand in 11 years. He had taken dressed fingers for less provocation than a hand extended through the fence. I knew, watching from the gallery, that I was witnessing something that could not be explained by any of the categories I had for wolves or for keepers or for the 11 years of failed approaches. And I also knew, with a certainty that had arrived sometime between the upper corridor and this gallery window, that I was not going to let her leave without saying something. The question was what to say. The formal signing happened on the 6th afternoon in the Great Hall with proper ceremony and proper seals. Oswald signed for the collective. I signed for Gravest. Orist and the legal specialist witnessed. The junior seat recorded the secondary copy in her precise and rapid hand, and I watched her write my name in the secondary record and felt, absurdly, as though it meant something it was not supposed to mean. The delegation was scheduled to depart the following morning. 6 of them, Oswald, the assessors, the legal specialist, the cartographer, and the record keeper. 7 of them had arrived. 1 of them I had decided the night before I was going to ask to stay. The difficulty was that I did not know precisely how to do that without it being either a formal proposition, which this was not, or a personal one, which I did not have the standing yet to make. I needed a middle ground, something honest and practical that was not a lie about what I meant. I had been told, occasionally, that I was not naturally gifted at the middle ground. I found her in the envoy chamber after the signing, reordering her records for transport. She was packing the documents into their cases with the same economical attention she gave everything, and she did not look up immediately when I came in, which meant she had not expected me and was not performing an expectation of me. "The past," I said. She looked up. Her expression was attentive, not startled. "The northern corridor will be passable once the Pact is registered," I said, "barring weather, but the wolf is still there." "Yes," she said. She waited. "The wolf has not allowed a keeper in 11 years," I said. "The pass remains a concern for every winter cycle, even with the Pact in place. If Vor moves against a caravan, which he has not done, but the risk is named in the document, the route closes again and the cost share provisions activate. My counsel would prefer certainty." "I understand," she said. She was still looking at me with that direct and undivided attention, and I was aware, in a way I was not usually aware of things, that I had been talking around the point. "I would like you to stay," I said. "Not as a collective delegate, not on a formal commission. I would like you to stay in Gravest for a season and work with the wolf, to see if what happened in the past holds, if it is a pattern, not a single occasion. If it is a pattern, then we have a keeper. If it is not, then you would have spent a season in a cold highland city, which is perhaps not what you would choose for a winter, and I would understand that." She was quiet for a moment. The chamber was quiet around her. Through the north-facing window I could see the beginning of the evening clouds settling over the upper ridge. "What is the wolf's history?" she asked. "Not why me, not what would the arrangement be, not what would I be paid, the wolf's history." I sat down on the edge of the envoy table, which was not a thing I would normally do, and I told her. Vor had come to Gravest as a bonded pup 14 years ago, one of 3 wolves brought from the Eastern Highland breeding lines that my predecessor had invested in. Of the 3, 2 had settled into the pack as expected, social, bondable, functional. Vor had been different from the beginning, larger, more watchful, more particular. He had bonded to my predecessor's first keeper, a man named Kale, and to Kale alone. When Kale died, a winter crossing, a horse that lost its footing on a familiar road, Vor had spent 3 days at the body before anyone could remove him, and after that he had not been the same wolf. He had not been a damaged wolf or a dangerous wolf immediately. He had been an absent wolf, present in the yard, eating, moving, alive, but not there in the way that bonded wolves are there, which is entirely. And then, 2 years after Kale's death, he had moved to the upper pass and made it his, and after that we had the 11 years. I did not tell her all of this in those exact words or in that order. I told it the way one tells something that has been considered at length in private and is being offered for the first time to someone who is asking honestly. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and I waited, because her quietness was not the absence of thought. "He has not bonded since," she said. "No." "You did not destroy him," she said. "Not a question exactly." "No." She looked at me for a moment with an expression I could not fully read, which was unusual. I read people reasonably well, as a matter of professional necessity. Her expression was not unreadable because it was guarded. It was unreadable because it was considering something complex and had not resolved it yet. "I will stay for the season," she said. I nodded. I said I would speak to Fenrath about the arrangements. I said the North Keeper's quarters were in good repair, though they were small. I said she would have access to the yard and the enclosure at her own hours without needing to ask permission. I said I would ask Oris to inform the collective that she was staying on a separate arrangement, and that she should tell me if there was anything in that communication she wanted handled differently. I recognized, giving her a great deal of practical information in order to avoid looking at her while I understood what I had just done. "One question," she said. I stopped and looked at her. "Why did you keep him?" she asked. "The wolf, for 11 years with the pass closed and the council advising otherwise. Why?" I considered the answer. The honest answer, which was the only one worth giving to a question asked that directly. "Because he was not wrong to grieve," I said. "He lost something that mattered and he did not recover from it. That is not the wolf's failure. I was not going to end him for it." She looked at me for a moment with an expression I recognized this time, because it was the one she had worn in the upper corridor, genuine attention, not performance. "All right," she said, "I'll stay." Oswald and the others left the next morning. I watched from the gallery. I was spending more time on galleries than I had in years, which was a fact about myself I noted without yet acting on, as 5 horses and a carriage moved through the iron south gate and out onto the mountain road. The 6th room in the delegate wing was being cleared of its previous occupants' effects, and the North Keeper's quarters were being aired, and the small hearth there was being laid for the first time in 3 years. I had a kingdom to run. I returned to the counting room and ran it. Len went to the yard after breakfast each morning, as she had done through the delegation week. Now, without the session schedule, she went longer, an hour, sometimes 2. I did not observe from the gallery every morning. I observed from the gallery most mornings, which was a distinction I maintained for perhaps the first 6 days before abandoning it as dishonest. Vor's behavior changed in a way I had no prior category for. He was not the bonded wolf he had been with Kale. He was not social in that way, not in the ordinary sense. But he was present in the yard when she was present in the yard, and when she moved to the enclosure fence, he came to the enclosure fence, and when she spoke to him, she spoke to him, in a low, even voice that I could not hear from the gallery but could see operating as a shape of sound. He listened with an alertness that he did not give anything else. On the 12th day of her stay, she asked Fenrath for permission to enter the enclosure. Fenrath came to me. He did not editorialize. He relayed the request and stood waiting. "Have the guard stand outside the enclosure gate with the bell," I said. "Not inside. Outside, so the wolf does not perceive the guard as a threat. The bell is for her use if she needs it, not for the guard to use at his own judgment." Fenrath relayed this. The guard was stationed. The gate was opened. I was at the gallery window. She walked in. Not quickly, not slowly, the same deliberate pace she used everywhere, the one that seemed to emerge from knowing what she was doing and having no need to announce it. Vor was at the far side of the enclosure, near the north wall where the stone kept some of the wind. He watched her come in. She sat down on the ground, cross-legged, near the center of the enclosure. She did not approach him. She simply sat. He watched her for a long time. I counted, 14 minutes. Then he got up and walked to her and lay down beside her. I stood at the gallery window for a while after that, looking at them, and thought about what I wanted to say next and when. The counting room waited. The afternoon tallies waited. Gravest's many requirements waited, in the patient and undemanding way that a well-ordered kingdom waits when its king is standing at a north gallery window, watching a wolf lie beside a woman in the autumn cold. I let them wait a few minutes more. The season settled into Gravest the way our seasons settle, quickly, with the specific efficiency of a highland autumn that does not linger. The upper pass began closing at night by the 5th week. The caravans that had been waiting at the southern way station resumed their run through the lower road, which was still passable, while the question of the upper corridor remained open. The wolves of the highland passes were unpredictable in the turn of season, and no one was sending goods through the upper corridor yet, regardless of what had happened in the survey. Trust in a route is rebuilt more slowly than the route itself. My merchant quarter understood this and was patient. They had been patient for 11 years. 4 more weeks was not a hardship. I had not told the council about Len, specifically. I had told Orist that the wolf showed signs of being approachable, and that a specialist from the collective had agreed to remain for a season to assess the situation. Orist had written a note in his ledger and not asked further, which was one of his better qualities. Torvald, my second, had raised an eyebrow and been told that the past situation was developing and would be reported when there was something to report. He had accepted this with the particular restraint of a man who serves under someone who is sometimes private about his reasoning, and who has learned that the reasoning tends to arrive eventually. The North Keeper's quarters were small but adequate. After 2 weeks I had a larger woodpile built for that hearth and the secondary window sealed against the north draft, because the drafts in that corridor were notable, and I was not going to have the only functional wolf keeper in a generation contract a winter ailment. This was practical. I understood that it was practical. She ate in the great hall at the common table, which was where I ate. I did not eat separately. It was not my custom. The first week she sat at the far end with the junior household staff. By the 3rd week she was sitting midway up the table, near the section where the secondary advisors and the skilled keeper sat. By the 5th week, through some organic process that I had observed but not engineered, she was 3 places from me at the head table, between Torvald's second and the master of the iron stores, and the conversations at that section of the table were longer and less formal than they had been before. She was easy to have in a room. Oswald had said it, and it was correct in a way that went further than Oswald had meant. She was easy to have in a room not because she was quiet or undemanding. She was neither when she was engaged, but because she was genuinely present. She did not perform interest. She did not perform ease. She was simply there, attending to whatever was in front of her, without the layer of calculation that most people in positions of any kind of visibility carry as a matter of survival. It made the people around her more at ease than they usually were, in the specific way that authenticity makes people easier without their knowing why. I was aware that I was thinking about her frequently. This was, in practical terms, not a problem. Frequent thought does not constitute anything in itself. It is only an internal weather pattern, and internal weather is not the business of kingdoms. I noted it and went about my business. I ran the kingdom. I attended the past surveys, which were showing clear conditions through the lower corridor and cautious activity at the upper edge. I reviewed the winter trade tallies. I sat through my council's report on the season's iron yield, which was down 4% from the prior year and up 11% from 2 years prior, which averaged to acceptable. I did the work of Gravest, which was considerable and not glamorous, and which I had never expected to be anything else. I also went to the North Yard on a Tuesday afternoon, 6 weeks into the season, when I knew from Fenrath's morning report that she would be there. It was cold, the kind of cold that does not announce itself but simply occupies the air and everything moving through it. She was inside the enclosure, sitting with her back against the north wall where the stone took some of the wind. Vor was beside her, not at her feet the way he had lain in the upper corridor, but beside her, close enough that his shoulder was against her arm. She had one hand on his flank. She was reading something, a small bound book balanced in her other hand. I opened the enclosure gate and went in. She looked up. Vor lifted his head. He looked at me for a moment with the measuring expression he gave things, and then, after a beat, put his head back down. Not the indifferent head down of an animal losing interest. The deliberate return of an animal that has considered the situation and made a judgment. I sat down against the north wall, a reasonable distance from them, and felt the cold of the stone immediately. "The past," I said. "The past is on your mind often," she observed. "It is the central problem of the kingdom for 11 years, I said. "Is that why you are in the enclosure?" I thought about that honestly. "No," I said. She waited. "The pass is holding," I said. "That is what I came to say. Orist rode the upper corridor yesterday with a small party. Vor was visible on the western ridge and made no movement toward them. It is the first time since the Pharaoh period that a party of riders has entered the upper corridor without being driven back." "That is good news," she said. "It is. The first caravan will attempt the pass in the second week of next month. If it comes through clean, we will know the route is viable again." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the top of Vor's head. Her hand moved slightly on his flank, not petting, exactly, more the way you rest a hand on a warm thing in cold weather. "How is he?" I asked, meaning Vor. "Calmer each week," she said. "He has started letting me check his feet, which he did not like at first. There's an old scar on his left foreleg from before, I think from before the 11 years. He guards it." "He did not injure it in any fall I know of," I said. "It may be from the eastern lines. Some of the Highland breeding operations were not careful." I thought so. She looked down at the wolf beside her at the top of his dark head. "He is not an easy animal. He has opinions about when contact is acceptable and when it is not, and he is direct about them. He bit me last week." I looked at her. She held up her left hand. There was a bandage wrapped around the base of her thumb. "Not seriously," she said. "He had warned me twice and I misjudged the boundary. That was my error, not his." I had not been told about the bite. I noted this and set it aside. "Are you in the habit of taking responsibility for things that injure you?" I asked. She considered this with the same attention she gave the wolf. "If I made the error, yes," she said. "He was clear about his limits. I pushed past them. He was correct to enforce them." I looked at the wolf. He looked back at me without much expression. "I would like to know when he bites you," I said, "in the future." "I'll recover well without reporting it," she said, not unkindly. "I am aware you will recover," I said. "I would still like to know." She looked at me with a considering expression. Then she said, "All right." The first caravan attempted the upper corridor on a cold, clear morning in the second week of the following month, which was the first week of winter proper by the Highland reckoning. 11 carts, 42 crates of lowland preserves, and a large roll of figured wool, the most valuable single consignment the collective had tested in years, because Oswald was nothing if not a person who understood the value of a meaningful first crossing. I rode with the survey party. Torvald rode with me. Oris stayed at the keep to manage the morning tallies, and because his hip had been troubling him in the cold, and I had no desire to have my senior trade advisor in physical distress on the Ridge Road. Len rode at the front of the survey party beside the caravan master, which was not something I had planned or arranged. It was simply where she placed herself, and the caravan master, who had heard something of the wolf situation from the way station steward, did not object. Vor appeared on the western ridge when we entered the upper corridor. He stood there, visible, dark against the cold sky, and watched. The caravan horses were alert and unhappy, but they moved. The caravan master kept them moving. Len did not look at the western ridge, or rather, she looked at it once briefly with the expression of a person checking something, and then faced forward again. Vor did not descend from the ridge. He watched us pass. We came through the upper corridor in 38 minutes. The exit opened onto the northern lowland road, which had been empty of commerce for 11 years, and now received 11 carts of lowland goods without ceremony, in the cold morning, on ice-crusted stone. The caravan master was a professional man, and professionals do not weep at their destinations. But he was quiet for a long moment before he counted his carts and made his notation in his own ledger. On the ride back through the corridor, Vor was gone from the ridge. When we returned to the keep and I went, as I had come to do, to the gallery window that faced the north yard, he was in the enclosure. He was lying in his usual winter position near the north wall. The enclosure was otherwise empty. Len had not yet come down from the ride. It occurred to me, watching the wolf in the empty enclosure, that there was a specific quality to the patience a creature demonstrates when it is waiting for a particular presence and has learned that the presence will arrive. It is different from ordinary waiting. It has a direction to it. I recognized the quality because I had been demonstrating it myself, from gallery windows, for 6 weeks. I went to the counting room and worked through the afternoon tallies, and thought about the shape of what was happening, and tried to be honest with myself about it, which was a habit I had developed in youth and never been able to give up even when honesty about oneself is inconvenient. What was happening was plain enough. A woman had arrived in Gravest as a seat filler for a trade delegation, had walked to the wolf's fence on her second morning without being asked to, had stood at that fence with the particular quality of stillness that most people cannot produce, because it requires the absence of fear rather than the management of it, and had undone, over 6 weeks, the 11-year absence of a bonded wolf's trust. What was also plain was that I had watched every stage of this from gallery windows with an attention that was not, and had never been, purely professional. The question of what to do about this was one I had been deferring. The deferral was over. I found her in the envoy chamber after supper, which she had taken to using as a secondary office for her own correspondence. She was writing at the desk by the north window, a lamp lit against the dark, and she did not look up immediately when I came in. "The caravan came through," she said. "Fenrath told me at supper." "Yes," I said, 42 crates and a roll of figured wool." "I heard," she set down her pen. "Your merchant quarter will be pleased." "They were more emotional about it than I expected," I said, and she smiled briefly in the lamplight. I sat in the chair across from her desk, which was not something I would normally do without being invited, and she did not appear to find it unusual. "The season's second month starts in 4 days," I said. "I know," she said. "My arrangement was for 1 season." "Yes." She waited. "I would like to discuss extending it," I said. "For a year. perhaps more depending. The pass will need a keeper who understands him through a full cycle of seasons, winter, spring thaw, summer, autumn, and then we would know what the pattern is and whether it can be formalized. The collective can be compensated for your absence from the Southern office. I have already drafted a letter to Oswald making that offer. She was quiet. Through the north wall I could hear the distant sound of the lower city settling into the evening. The iron bridge cables made their particular sound in the night wind, a low, resonant note, something between a hum and a voice. "You have already drafted a letter," she said. "Yes." "Before speaking to me." "To have the offer ready if you said yes," I said. "The letter is drafted, it has not been sent." She looked at me with the expression that I was beginning to know, the one where she was considering something complex and had not resolved it yet. I found, for the first time in my memory, that I did not know what the resolution was going to be. Most conversations I could map from the beginning. This one I could not, and the inability was not uncomfortable in the way I would have expected. "What is the second question?" she asked. I looked at her. "You have two things to ask me," she said. "The keeper arrangement is one. What is the second?" There were advantages and disadvantages to a person who was genuinely present and not performing. One of the disadvantages was that they noticed when you were doing the same thing. "I'm not certain I know how to ask it properly," I said. "You could try plainly," she said. "That seems to work for you." "I am aware," I said, "that over the course of the last 6 weeks, I have been paying attention to you in a way that exceeds what the keeper arrangement or the wolf situation would require. I am aware that this attention has been increasing rather than stabilizing. I am not certain whether you have noticed it or, if you have, what you make of it. I would like to know." She was quiet for a moment. The room was quiet around her. The iron bridge cables hummed. "I noticed it in the 3rd week," she said. "What do you make of it?" I asked. "I haven't decided," she said. "It is unusual for me to be paid attention to in that particular way. I work with documents and records and occasionally large, difficult animals. I am not someone to whom that kind of attention is routinely directed." "You should be," I said, and meant it simply. She looked at me. "That's the plainest thing you've said." "I said I would try it," I said. She looked at Vor, who was not present. He was in the enclosure in the north yard, but whose absence was its own kind of presence in the room, in the way that the things a conversation is really about are often not named directly, but occupy the space around the words anyway. "Let me ask you something," she said. "Yes." "The North Keeper's quarters," she said. "The woodpile, the sealed window." I said nothing. "Those were done in the 2nd week," she said, "before the arrangement was extended, before the wolf had done anything beyond come to the fence." "The quarters were cold," I said. "The quarters were cold," she repeated. "Yes." She was quiet. A small and specific smile arrived on her face and stayed longer than the previous one had. "Send the letter to Oswald," she said. "I'll stay the year." I sent the letter to Oswald the next morning. His reply arrived in 9 days and was gracious, because Oswald was a professional, and because the collective's compensation made grace easier. The arrangement was formalized. Len would remain in Gravest for a minimum of 1 year as the Northern Pass Wolf Specialist, with provisions for extension by mutual agreement. The winter came in full through the upper corridor, as it always did, cold and gray and absolute. The pass caravans ran until the snow closed the surface entirely, 6 weeks later in the season than the prior year, because Vor was no longer blocking the route, and because the early autumn window had been productive. My merchant quarter made a careful noise about this that was not quite celebration, and was not quite gratitude, but lived in the space between them, which was a space Gravest people occupied with some comfort, having been trained by the Highland weather to keep their expectations measured. Vor settled into his winter patterns. He moved between the enclosure and the outer yard, and twice in the deep winter, through the north corridor of the keep itself, a thing he had not done since Kale's time. Fenrath noted this in the household record with the dry precision of a man who has seen unusual things and prefers to document them accurately and say nothing further. My council, when they learned of it, had varied opinions, mostly cautious ones. I listened to the caution and thanked them and kept my own thinking separate. I ate dinner with Len most evenings, not deliberately, or not only deliberately. She was at the head table because she had progressed there, through that organic process I had not engineered, and I was at the head table because I always was. But in the winter evenings, when the short dark came early and the great hall was warm against it, I found myself remaining longer than I would have otherwise, and the conversation that lasted in those evenings was not the conversation about the wolf or the pass or the trade route or the collective, though we spoke about all those things. It was the other kind of conversation, the kind where you learn what a person thinks about things that have nothing to do with their professional responsibilities, the kind where you find out if a person's mind interests you in the particular way you had suspected it might. Hers interested me considerably. She had opinions about Highland architecture. She found the Gravest iron bridges more elegant than people gave them credit for. She had read more extensively than her record-keeping role suggested, including a running correspondence with a natural historian in the eastern lowlands who was documenting wolf behavior, which was how she had known. She told me one evening that what she was doing with Vor at the fence was not nothing, that there were documented approaches, slow and patient ones, that had reached feral animals before, though not often one this isolated for this long. She had read the available literature on her first evening in the keep, after the session's end, by the lamp in her quarters, because Vor had come to the fence on the first morning, and she had known then it was worth reading about. I sat with that for a moment when she told me. On the first morning, I said. He came to the fence on the first morning, she said. I knew then. You did not show it, I said. There was nothing to show yet, she said. He came to the fence. That was interesting. What came next would tell me if it was more than interesting. I thought about what that quality was, the one that could stand at a fence with an 11-year feral wolf and experience genuine interest rather than fear, could go back the next morning and the next, could enter an enclosure and sit in the middle of it and wait, could take a bite on the thumb and report it as her own error and mean it. It was not fearlessness exactly, because fearlessness implies the absence of something that ought to be present. It was more the presence of something more important than fear, attention, or patience, or the particular kind of calm that comes from being genuinely comfortable with slowness. I had run a Highland kingdom for 13 years. I had learned to be comfortable with slowness in the administrative sense, with the long pace of infrastructure decisions and treaty negotiations, and the patience required to let a council reach consensus rather than simply directing them to one. But I had not learned to be comfortable with slowness in the personal sense, which was a different skill, and one I had not thought I needed. I was reconsidering that assessment. The deep winter weeks passed in their gray and particular way. The pass was closed by snow and would remain so until the thaw, which was expected in the 12th week of winter based on the prior 7 years' patterns. The caravans waited at the southern way stations, or ran the long ridge route with resigned professionalism. The kingdom managed its winter requirements, as it always did, with the specific competence of a Highland community that has been managing winters for generations, and has no illusions about their difficulty. On the first day of the new year, when Gravest observed the tradition of the Iron Ledger, where the accounts of the prior year were formally closed, and the first entry of the new year written, I walked from the great hall accounting to the North Keeper's quarters with the household master's record book and knocked. She opened the door. She was wearing the warm indoor clothes she wore in the evenings, the heavy wool, and the northern boots that Fenrath had arranged for her in the second week, which she wore with the practicality she gave everything. "It's the ledger day," I said. "I know," she said. "I heard the steward ringing the bell." "The tradition is to write the first entry of the year yourself," I said. "The ledger holder can designate someone to write it on their behalf. I would like to designate you." She was quiet. "It is a symbolic act," I said. "The first entry is typically a sentence or two about what the year intends. There is no prescribed language." "You are the ledger holder," she said. "I am the wolf keeper." "Yes," I said. "And the wolf keeper is the reason the pass is open, and the merchant quarter ran a full autumn season, and the winter goods moved through for the first time in 11 years, which is the main thing the year's first ledger entry ought to record." She looked at me for a moment. I was aware, standing in the corridor of the North Keep on the first day of a new year, of the sound of the wind in the iron bridge cables above us, and the distant noise of the household, and the very specific silence of the space between us, which was a silence I had come to recognize, the kind that is not empty but is waiting. "You could write it yourself," she said. "You seem to have a clear idea of what it should say." "I have a clear idea about a great many things," I said. "What I would like is for you to write this one, if you are willing." She looked at the ledger book. She looked at me. The considering expression was there, and then it resolved into something I had not seen from her before, something simpler and without the layer of consideration over it, something that was simply itself. She took the ledger book. We went back to the great hall. She wrote the first entry of the year at the head table in her precise and rapid hand, and I watched her write it, and what she wrote was, "The northern pass corridor is open. The great wolf holds it. What was lost has a new keeper, and the kingdom is whole again." She handed the ledger back. I read what she had written and did not say anything for a moment, because I was doing the thing she did, attending to something without interrupting it. "It is a very accurate entry," I said. "That's the profession," she said. "Not entirely," I said. "The last sentence." She did not look away. "No," she said. "Not entirely." We ate the ledger day meal, which was traditional and good, and the evening went on around us the way evenings do in a keep in winter, warm and specific and its own. And Vor came through the north corridor door, which Fenrath had learned to leave unlatched when the deep cold came, and settled near the great hall hearth in a way that made the household staff glance at each other, and then decide not to remark on it. Because remarkable things become unremarkable quickly when they are warm and quiet and mean no harm. The thaw came in the 11th week, which was a week earlier than projected and 2 weeks earlier than the prior year. The pass road surface was clear by the 14th week, and the first caravan of the new year attempted the upper corridor on a morning that was cold but windless and full of the particular light that comes after Highland winter, sharp and true, and without softness, the kind of light that shows things exactly as they are. Vor stood on the western ridge again, as he had in the autumn. This time there was no survey party. It was the caravan alone, moving through the upper corridor, 43 crates of spring goods and 2 bolts of linen, and a crate of the preserved fruits the Highland households had been short of all winter. Len was not at the front of this caravan. She was in the enclosure when it came through, and Vor was on his ridge, and the caravan master wrote in his record, "Passage achieved, no incident, conditions good." The second caravan came through the following week. The third, the week after. By the 5th week of the thaw, the northern trade route was running on its normal seasonal schedule for the first time in 11 years, and the toll revenues had recovered to a level that would allow the repair of the way station at the upper pass, which had been abandoned for a decade and was structurally compromised and needed attention. My counsel was satisfied in a way that went beyond satisfaction into a kind of collective relief that was, I thought, proportionate to the length of the problem and the unexpectedness of its resolution. Torvald wrote in the monthly report that the kingdom's trade position had improved substantially, and the seasonal projections for the year were the strongest in a decade. Oris drafted a note of thanks to the collective for their partnership in the resolution, which was diplomatic and accurate as far as it went. It went some distance short of the truth, which was that the resolution had arrived in the form of a woman no one had sent for, who had stood at a fence on her second morning in gray vest out of simple curiosity, and had, by that act, begun to unmake 11 years of absence. I said some version of this to her in the spring, on an evening when we had stayed at the head table after the household had cleared, and the great hall was quiet, and the lamps were low. She listened to it and was quiet for a moment. "I didn't plan it," she said. "I know," I said. "I went to the fence because I saw the yard from the kitchen garden, and I was curious what was in the enclosure," she said. "That's all it was." "Yes," I said, "that is what made it work." She looked at me with the expression I had come to know well by then, the complex one, the considering one. It resolved, as it had been resolving more readily as the winter and the spring passed, into the simpler expression beneath it. "I think," she said, "that you have been trying to tell me something for a number of months." "I have been telling you things," I said. "Things adjacent to the thing," she said. I looked at the lamp flame. I looked at the dark hall around us, and the quiet stone and the iron bridge cables just audible through the north wall, humming in the spring wind. "When you came through the south gate," I said, "I was watching from the gallery. I did not know your name. I noticed you because you looked up at the arches, not at me, at the arches, at the shape of the stone. I thought, that is a person who is actually seeing what is in front of them. I have not seen that often enough to find it unremarkable." She was still. "I have been watching from gallery windows for months," I said, "and eating at the same table and asking Fenrath for reports on the enclosure and sealing window frames and drafting letters before asking your permission, all because that quality, the actual seeing, the attending, the stillness at the fence, is something I have no adequate word for and want to be near. I would like to continue being near it. I would like to make that a clear and specific request rather than a series of practical arrangements." The hall was very quiet. "That is the plainest thing you have said yet," she said. "I have been working up to it," I said. The smile arrived, not brief this time, not contained. It stayed. "Yes," she said, "to the clear and specific request." I sent a second letter to Oswald the next morning, this one informing him that the arrangement had extended indefinitely by mutual agreement. He replied in 10 days with the gracious professionalism I had come to expect from him, and a note at the end of his letter that was not required by the formality but was, I thought, genuinely meant, that he had always found Len difficult to place correctly, because she operated at a level that administrative records did not have a category for, and that he was glad she had found one. I read that note twice, and then filed the letter in the formal correspondence record, which was where it belonged, and thought that Oswald was perhaps more perceptive than I had given him credit for. The year went on. The seasons moved in their Highland way quickly, with consequence, without sentimentality. Vor held the pass. The caravans ran. The merchant quarter recovered its 11-year deficit in the specific and deliberate way that Highland commerce recovers, which is without drama and with careful attention to the ledger. My council noted the improvement in the annual reports and moved on to the other pressing matters of a kingdom's governance, which are always numerous and various, and do not pause to acknowledge progress for long. I did not pause to acknowledge progress either, which was my usual habit. But some things are not progress in the ordinary sense. Some things are simply what you find yourself doing when something arrives in your life that makes the shape of the life visible. The way light from a different angle makes a surface visible that you have walked past without seeing for years. What Len wrote in the ledger on the first day of that year was accurate in the way that only certain sentences are accurate. The ones that no more than the person writing them quite realizes, the ones that carry a weight they could not have been meant to carry when they were set down. The kingdom was whole again. I knew, by the summer, that she had meant to write about the wolf in the pass, and had written about something else as well, and that the something else was the truest part. Vor sleeps across the threshold of the north chamber now, which is our chamber, which is the room where I have always worked, and where the cold comes in at the window seam in January, and where the iron bridge cables make a sound in certain winds that is like a voice speaking in the distance. He moves when we move and settles when we settle, and he has the scar on his left foreleg, and he guards it from examination occasionally and permits it occasionally, and that is simply the truth of him, which is enough. The pass runs clean through the upper corridor in every season that the weather allows, and in the seasons that the weather does not allow, we wait. In 11 years I had learned to be patient with the waiting. What I had not known was that patience is different when you wait alongside someone, and I did not know that until she was alongside me, and I will not forget it now. She came to seal a trade pact. She sealed something else instead, and my world, which I had believed I understood entirely, undid itself at the seam and became larger than I had planned for, and I did not mind that at all.